when you're thinking, your eyes do Felix the cat. Do you know this?
No.
Yeah, you do this.
They go back and forth?
Really slowly, just like a Felix the cat clock.
You know what I've heard is, and of course, I think like the field of lie detection is probably about as bogus as like the field of like
palmistry.
Yeah, but I have heard people who do this say that when you that you can tell if someone's lying because based on the right left brain split, when you are, and I can't remember which is which, but when you are remembering something, your eyes look one way, and when you're inventing something, they look the other way. So maybe that's what's happening when I think that I'm.
Yeah, you're remembering and lying the whole time.
I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week I have my very first guest, Traci O'Day, Associate Editor of Smartish Pace and author of the brand new poetry collection Restricted Movement, available now from Scotland Street Press. Traci and I have a really long, weird, interesting conversation. The first half is largely about her book. We talk about form, we talk about writing personally, writing publicly, separating the art from the artist, whether that can be done at all, whether differences between poetry here and poetry in the UK, where Traci lives. In the second half of the conversation, we get even further afield. Traci brought in a couple of articles that we got to read and pull apart together. We talk about Billie Eilish. We talk about Ali Ali, about women's fashion, and we get political and personal, and talk about how weird dads are. And we also talk about whether or not influencers are artists, which is a pretty fucking horrifying idea, but it is a really interesting and fun conversation. The sound quality is slightly rougher than would be ideal, mostly for reasons that are mostly because I'm still learning how to fucking record a Zoom call, but figured some things out, and it will only be getting smoother from here. So, as I said, the sound quality is slightly rougher than I'd like, but it's still pretty good, and with any luck, you will enjoy it. Let's go to that right now.
I mean, he read the book, and I talked to him, and I mean, he's really proud of it, and he like cried a bunch of times when he saw it, and he just said, I'm really sorry for making you worry that much about me. And I mean, that's really it. Like he doesn't realize that he's doing these things that are like making his daughters insane with worry, because he's not in that world. He thinks he's doing what he needs at the time or what's right for him at the time, and he doesn't really explore the consequences. I mean, do I think it's going to change anything necessarily that he read the book? I don't know. I think if he could get on the outside and go score some drugs right now, he probably would. So I don't think it's really going to make that much of a difference. He's still going to be the same rule-breaking character that he's always been.
That's, I mean, you say at a few points that there's almost to distinguish this from some sort of triumphant narrative of recovery or something. You say, I know he'll never be sober. I know that, there's a line where you say, I know I'm just I know I'm just buying weeks between ODs, which I
Yeah.
feel that both you talk explicitly again, like the paintings sort of break the fourth wall by presenting us with this very physical sense of his existence, but then you also address the purpose of the poetry you're writing a number of times. I thought, that line, the weeks between ODs, I thought of Frost's. You're talking about poetry as a momentary stay against confusion. It feels like the whole book could almost be one of these, either one of these episodes or one of these intervals between them that will then shortly begin again.
Yes, the book is a cycle. You can read the book over and over again because that's the life I'm living pretty much
Right.
over and over again. I mean,
Both,
I
both, both,
didn't.
both with the pandemic and with this crisis, this ongoing crisis.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I didn't want any sort of sewn up ending because there isn't one. And I mean, uh, Dad dying is sort of the end of this, and I don't want that ending. So I'm really fine with living with this, and I think the book is a gift, and writing about it is a gift because it is how I process it, and it is 100% the thing that saved me.
Yeah.
So what happened was I was sending out my sort of poetry anthology, my collection of poems that I've been publishing since 2003, out to the world, and Scotland Street Press wrote back and said, we love this book. It's great. Um, we're sort of interested in doing some stuff that centers more around the pandemic right now. Do you have anything else? And I said, oh, well, I've just started working on this book. I've started working on these poems about my dad. And also he's an artist. And they said, well, we like to publish illustrations along with our poetry. So I said, well, that would be awesome. I would love to do a collaboration with him, his paintings and my poetry. And they said, okay, we want to publish that book. So then that's how this happened. I hadn't written it yet. And they asked me to write this book, and I did. And then the paintings, most of them are paintings of Dad's that I've already had, and then there were 2 new ones that he did specifically for the collection.
Just to go ahead and get some of the book in your own voice into the listeners' ears, would you mind starting with just the first title poem, so they can?
Yeah,
I think it helps sort of provide a little bit of an introduction to some of this.
of course. No, it is. So the title poem, it's called Restricted Movement, the book, and the title poem, I think it really just sort of sets up everything. And we had different titles at different points, and this is the one that I decided on with the publisher because I think it does set up that idea. And the reason it's called Restricted Movement is in Jersey, the order that kept people inside was called the Jersey Restricted Movement Order. And then the one in Maryland is the epigraph of the poem, which says, all persons living in the state of Maryland are hereby ordered, effective as of 8 p.m. on March 30th, 2020, to stay in their homes or places of residence. So that's the order of the governor of the state of Maryland, 20/03/30/01. No order tells my dad what he can't do. You'd think he'd be the one most used to it, but prison didn't break him, only made him value freedom more. He disappears for days to prove the laws do not apply to him. Each time my heart sours, a fizz like blue-green algae film on stagnant pond. Neighbors ask if he's okay. He's fine, I lie, or maybe it's a prayer. I try to recollect what it was like before, what I worried about. Earlier still, my whole childhood he spent in jail. I slept just fine back then. I never dreamt of him. You'd think I'd be the one most used to it.
So I remember years ago you're telling me, I think it was about reading reading for a Smarter Space, but you said, you read and write free verse and formal poetry, but when you see a poem written in meter, you pause a little bit longer with it. And the book is, I think, fittingly given the subject matter, there's a lot of blank verse. There's some strict forms. There's some like these that are sort of this is a kind of a slightly broken up sonnet that also has some kind of mirror elements to it and a little bit of rhyme, a lot of slant rhyme. How did you? I don't know. I don't know if your philosophy on that has changed over the years, but my impression of you is that you are. I largely think of you as somebody who writes in form, but then I mean, some of this is just is you have at least one just block prose poem, and then plenty of kind of free verse poems are very loose iambic poems.
Yep, I probably still feel my philosophy is probably still exactly the same. Um, I give more attention to poems in form when I'm reading them because I feel like the poet gave more attention to it when writing it. And that's a sort of lazy generalization, but it is also something that just resonates with me. So if I see something or read something that has rhythm, then I tend to, my ears perk up. There's just, I believe it is just because I read so much in iambic pentameter and I write in iambic pentameter or iambic anything. Like a lot of the letters are in very loose iambic meter with varying line lengths. And it's just sort of what I live and breathe in. So if someone else is doing it just because it sort of, I don't know, plucks a chord from my poetic wheelhouse, I feel, to mix metaphors, I feel like it's something familiar.
Yeah,
And also, like I said before, there's a certain amount of effort. So if you're writing in form, then I know you've taken time on the poem.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not saying that people who write in blank verse don't take time. And obviously, you said there's a prose poem in there, and I don't feel that way at all. But I do think it's just sort of a signpost, like, hey, here I am, I'm a poem.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have. I mean, honestly, I have a harder time knowing how to think about craft with free verse poems. That they're free verse poems I love, but more often I find that they have to be either just a lightning bolt that amazes me and I can't account for it, or they sort of fall flat. But with it seems like I'm always a little bit skeptical of mimesis arguments with poetry, partly because I know, at least from my own experience, how much is stumbled upon rather than planned. But given the restricted movement that is in the content throughout the whole book, did that come up at all in your consideration of form, or is it just that did you just have to set that aside and let it happily line up when it did?
I'm definitely, it was, I mean, it's organic. It was, like you said, stumbled upon, that kind of thing. When we were coming up with the title and when we decided on this as the title, that definitely came into play. Like, oh, right. Like, that makes sense that this would be the title because form is a sort of writing in form is the idea of restricted movement is there. There's so many ways that restricted movement plays throughout this book, and with Dad and the paintings and all the different places where he is and where we are. And it really was just like, oh, right, this is the perfect title.
Yeah.
So, but as far as the form is concerned, I certainly wasn't thinking of that. I wanted to do the whole thing. It was at one point called Iambic Pandemic Diary. So it's this, right. So it was very much, I knew I was going to be writing it in some sort of iambic form. And I knew that it was going to be about the pandemic, and I knew that it was going to be about Dad. And the restricted movement aspect of it, again, just seemed completely organic.
For a number of years, you were living in the British Virgin Islands. You're now living in the Channel Islands, which I did not even realize until quite recently existed. But you have been immersed um, in British culture, broadly speaking, for long enough that I know some of it is that the conventional spelling in the book is British, but there are also Britishisms in the language that come up. It's not. I don't think there are any loos or lorries, but they're you say you nicked his diary, or I think you use fancy in the way that we might use a word like or have a crush. So there are a couple little, they're not, and I would say this not because I think they're particularly pronounced, but because along with then the S's instead of the Z's and these kind of things, there is a kind of another interesting tension between this life that you have far away, and then this kind of childhood in Baltimore, and this kind of Baltimore girl self that tugs at you, both through your trips home and obviously through your relationship with your father.
You're the first person who's pointed this out, so let's talk about this.
Okay.
Except that people, when I go home, my friends definitely think that I have a British accent, which I clearly do not have. But I use Britishisms all the time. I'm also married to a Scottish man, and I am surrounded by English speakers as opposed to American English speakers. So, and I'm writing for a lot of magazines over here, and I have to do the spellings with the OURs and the IZEs and all of that. I didn't realize that I'd used fancy or nicked in a way that I wouldn't. It's just such a part of my vocabulary now.
No, yeah.
I think
I'm keen to discuss that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
There's subtle Britishisms.
Exactly.
When I married Joanne, I started saying Appalachian instead of Appalachian, just because if I said Appalachian around her family, I would get a very, very harsh looks. So yeah, understandable, adjustments we make.
I think I called a friend of mine a mummy the other day because that's what she calls herself.
Oh,
like I would never,
yeah, okay.
I would never, right, like not a mummy like in a tomb, but I would never call my mom but I would call my husband's mom his mum. So I mean, because it's spelled differently, so it's actually it's a different word. Yeah. But my sister was like, "What is that word? Why are you saying mummy?" And yeah, so that happens. I am sort of this weird hybrid person at the moment.
I am, my default position is that I radically separate the life from the artist. But I mean, this book, they're absolutely inseparable. So I'll shift quickly to a very fun poem called "To the Activists," which I think also articulated something I have not heard articulated. Well, a couple things I've not heard articulated before, but articulate a sentiment I think that is specific to this past year. Would you read that for us, please?
Sure. To the activists. I see you on TV, bemasked, with megaphone. My meerkat ovaries perk up. I mishear streets as sheets. You want my body there. I mute a moan. Your genius deconstructs the media, deletes old norms, deprograms centuries of brainwashing. My genius is more intimate. I yearn to give you this, to bolster you, do what I can. Till now, I never understood the groupie thing. We move so deep, you skim flecked strands of DNA. So high, you scissor Neowise's tails. Immense yet microscopic. After, I'm spent while you go slay. But I can't do you all. Instead, I'll broadcast, blare the amplifying energy. On stage, you sense a prick like a flea bite, a pulse like a sun flare.
Yeah, and Neowise, which thank you for pronouncing because I did not know how to pronounce it, is the name of a comet that passed through the sky in 2020.
Yeah, it was during the pandemic. Or yeah, it was the pandemic comet.
Pandemic comet. And the sentence, in case anyone missed it, was "You scissor Neowise's tails," which is, I had to restart this poem halfway into starting it to understand the argument it was making. It is very much reminiscent of Donne, I think, John, which and I don't know how it was just delivered. Sneeze bite in the last line. I couldn't help but think of Donne's, wild sort of sexual metaphysical conceits that include the solar system as well as, a tiny drop of blood, or in this case, flecked strands of DNA. But this is, would you just say a word about the response to the public moment, at least, that led into this poem?
Sure. Um, I I actually have a very good friend who is doing amazing things for Black Lives Matter movement, etc., by publishing books, uh, well, by the Black Lives Matter activists, and a lot of that's sort of his thing, is to publish voices that have been previously unheard or not amplified. And there's this idea that he was the first person I sort of thought of, and then I thought of all the other activists. Like, look at what you're doing. Like, you're literally changing policies. You are changing the way that people think. And then it wasn't just activists for Black Lives Matter movement, but obviously much more the non-binary movement, and all of this sort of throwing over the systems that are in place. So everyone who is actually taking the time to overthrow these systems and who is actually getting it done, and maybe making people think differently than they've ever thought before, and really getting it out there publicly. So I'm not one of those people. Like, I am not an activist, and I am not in that way. I'm not out there changing policies or necessarily reprogramming people's brains. And so the poem was me wondering, well, what could I do? And I can do two things really well. And this was once a line in the poem: I can fuck and I can write. And it's a very boasty sort of MC thing to say. But I'm just sort of like, these are my two gifts, and how could I use them to bolster these movements? And that's where this poem came from.
My genius is more intimate is a line that was the line I had to stop and start the poem again on. If I were cleverer, I would have more to say about why it's fitting that this is a sonnet, but I'll just say that I think it is.
Well, it's a sonnet because it's a love poem. I mean, it is.
Well, yeah, no, yeah.
Simply, that's a simple enough explanation. Yeah. It is a love poem.
Yeah, I think I'm interested in like the problem consolation imbalance of a sonnet. So maybe that's part of what I see there, that there's it's not clear, in this case, it's not broken up into the octave and the sestet, but there's like a sense of like an 8 lines worth of need and 6 lines worth of response, that's possible, that's accessible. Throughout the book, you have poems, they're not, the font or the type, the typography doesn't even set them apart as titles, but they all begin "Dear Dad." It's a series of poems that all begin "Dear Dad" throughout the book, and I think it's the one that ends the book as well. But in one of them, 47, there it is. That one is numbered. One of the "Dear Dad" poems, you say, "So as I pass him in the driveway, roll down windows to say hello, and he asks if you're okay. Tears come." That the entire independent clause occurs in the last 2 words in a way that just felt that is a line that felt wonderfully mimetic. You're holding back the tears, and they're that "as" tells us that they're coming throughout the whole sentence, but they only arrive at the very end. If you were to present a poem or a portion of it for us that was only as uncomfortable as you wish to get, what would that be? I mean, I want to let you give a kind of a final treatment of it without my intrusive questions.
Well, I actually think that poem that you just pointed out, this "Dear Dad" poem, on the one on page 47, which is, I think, the shortest "Dear Dad," because most of the "Dear Dads" are longer letters to Dad. I mean, this one is certainly, it gives you other characters. So it's like addressing my mom, and addressing my stepdad. So there's this whole weird relationship, obviously, between them, and also addressing the writing of the book. So I think this is a really poignant one, and I'm happy to read this one. And yeah, it's uncomfortable for me to read. I've never read this out loud before. What you said earlier about, I guess, sort of death of the author, I feel exactly the same. I mean, don't, I mean, in the UK, it's different. So they are very much interested in looking at a writer's life biographically in order to address the work. And I mean, I think in the States, we do not subscribe to that at all. And I think that comes from Death of the Author, which was what, 60s? And ever since then, English studies in the US has said you have to take the art separate from the artist. But in the UK, especially, well, I was teaching secondary school for a little while over here, which is high school. They are very interested in what 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 was happening in the author's life at the time of the piece of art that might be created, as well as if the author has said anything about the creation, which I don't trust ever. No, never. So it was at one point I was teaching a poem for their GCSEs, which is sort of like their high school exams, and there was one of the poets that was being taught. This is the national school exam, so all the English students are taking the same exam. The poet who was featured on the exam is still alive, and she had a website where she would answer students' questions about her poems that they could then, use for answering their exam papers. And I was like, what? You can't ever do that. There is no right or wrong answer about a poem, and you can't say, well, the poet said this, blah blah blah. So yes.
Why would you want to give those?
Oh, I know, of course. But I mean, if someone asks me about this book,
Right.
I'm going to give them an answer
Sure.
that I think comes from my own life, blah blah blah. But that doesn't mean that someone can't read to the activists and completely get a different experience than what I wrote. I do sometimes think that this book is a memoir more than a book of poetry, and that makes it complicated. And it's certainly not a book that I would ever set out to write, as if I was thinking like, oh, what is my poetry going to be like? I wouldn't think this was the book that's going to happen, but this is the book that did happen. And it's super duper personal and oftentimes painful and quite revealing. And I asked everyone in it if they were okay with being in it, because I think sometimes you don't think you would ever have to do that with a book of poetry. Like, you would never think you would have to ask permission of the people in it if it was okay. But I did. I'm not Dad. I mean, Dad knew I was writing it sort of all along, so I don't think I ever really actually asked his permission. But she's horrible. But my sister and my mom and some of the friends who are sort of name dropped, just random friends who appear in the book, I had to ask them, is it okay if I'm sort of telling your story while telling mine? Which you just don't think is something you have to do. But anyway, I'll read this poem. Dear Dad, Mom says she's jealous that you're getting a book. She's not. I get her point. She raised us on her own. I never knew you growing up. Sometimes I'd walk past homeless men in Fells and ask if they were you. She doesn't know that not having to write about her is the greatest compliment. It means that she's the opposite of stress, what I escape to, not from. I write the things my brain can't handle on its own. I get them down on paper, see them on the page, then wrestle them into a form I can control, or I get overwhelmed. My stepdad's never hidden his disdain for you, for choosing drugs over your wife and kids. He married Mom when we were 8 and 11, and knew you never tried to see us our whole lives until you sobered up and we grew up. He didn't want you at my wedding at their house, but had to let you come. So as I pass him in the driveway, roll down windows to say hello, and he asks if you're okay, tears come. You have no clue how much it kills me, keeping you alive.
Yeah, that last line was another one that I caught on in a different book. It's the kind of line that would appear in a poem that was addressing someone who was dead. Right. I mean, the poem, so long as men can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this and this gives
Yes,
thee. But this is a poem. This book seems both to be keeping your father alive in verse in essence, but also it's literally an account of keeping him alive day to day.
yes.
Yeah, this poem in particular uh, made me think of the prodigal son story, but from the perspective of the father, who's has to, whose other son, who has been the good son, says like, well, where the fuck is my fatted calf? Where's my feast? And
Where's my book?
I've long sympathized with that son, saying like, well, shit, like what, But then this made me sympathize with the father. It's like, well, I'm doing my best here. I'm trying to make it, like I'm happy he's alive. I'm happy he's back. And yeah, sure, of course you're great. You're great, and I never have to worry about you.
Oh, that's a really funny comparison. So my mom is the good son, and my dad is this prodigal son. Wow, that's a little bit to unpack.
Well, it's like the prodigal son if he was the prodigal son every week. Right?
Yes.
It's not like the one big homecoming. Do we have another fatted calf to kill? Yeah. And that is, I think, as with the portrait of your father, who's he's sort of like a Shakespeare. The poem Shakespeare Street. He was born on Shakespeare Street. He is a little bit of like a Shakespearean character in that it's a very sad figure, but also uh, oddly lighthearted and very funny and very kind of mischievous. And the book itself is both just brutally depressing at times and also really funny. I mean, it's as evidenced by the activist poem, but as well as by plenty of the poems about your dad, about his mischief at all of the different ages that he's lived. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think Lear is one of the funniest Shakespearean plays, and I think people disagree with me on that, but it's hilarious. There's so much humor in Lear.
it's horribly dark, but it's also
Exactly. And I could see Dad definitely as this Lear character, sort of losing his mind and loving his daughters, but not, well, not loving them to death yet.
he's sort of like Lear and Lear's fool.
Yes.
Because
Well, I mean, Lear's Fool is a part of Lear, right? It's
yeah. Yeah, I hope people will go read Restricted Movement. Should we give a disclaimer to secondary school kids that they should not rely on your account here to give them answers for their?
yes, we need to definitely say that.
Yeah.
If this is ever taught at GCSE or A level, please do not use anything I said as the definitive answer for the exam.
Good, yes.
Thank you.
When we talked about this interview a little while ago, my annoying assignment to you was that I wanted to find an article or essay or subject, cultural subject of some kind that you had sort of mixed critical feelings about, and you brought up the Billie Eilish British Vogue cover photo shoot and story, and then of course there was this big reaction to it, and I don't know how much context people need. I knew of Billie Eilish because my sister was a fan and she introduced me to some of her music, and which I think is very, very well done. I mean, she's extremely talented. It's hard not for me not to think of her as just a child because she's insanely young.
Yes.
She's not she's 19 now, but was something like 14 when she first started, putting this music out. My wife, of course, I knew nothing but her name, so I should say, like, she uh, released her first record in 2019 when she was 17. She and her older brother, who is himself still a kid, he's just a couple years older, they write and produce all of this in their bedroom, and they've been doing this since they were little kids. And it's this record she put out, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, was an enormous hit. She won a number of Grammys for it, and it was this huge cultural and critical sensation. Uh, I do know that, like, it is, there does seem to be something of a generational divide. My dad and his wife saw her on Saturday Night Live, and just, it was like just a brick wall. It could have, the TV could have just gone to like white noise for 3 minutes, and their response would have been the same. Whereas, the young kids were really obsessed with her. I, I when I listen to her music, I can tell it's definitely not for me, but it's not. This is not nothing. There's something impressive happening here. For one thing, I just like that she rhymes well. She rhymes like a rapper. She's a lot of feminine rhyme and a lot of cocky sneering, which I appreciate. But so then she part of her whole appeal, I guess, and I can read from this is the New York Times piece that came out right before her record, um, her first record came out. So she collected some 15 billion followers on Instagram. Among those legions, many had already started to adopt the musician's striking visual aesthetic. And this is part of what the story we're going to talk about is focused on. Her striking visual aesthetic, which this journalist describes, I think, accurately as performatively dead eyes, bored at best, hair dyed in shades of electric blue and pale purple, an all baggy anti-silhouette, a collective middle finger to the strictures of teen pop sex appeal. So that is it seemed to be a big part of her. I'm inclined to say shtick, but I think that people would say brand, or her look was that she wore very big, baggy, kind of a often very colorful, but almost asexual clothes. This is part of her deal. And then in advance of this new record that is coming out soon, she appeared in British Vogue. It was just on the cover, and there was a photo shoot that accompanied it. And in this, she has very blonde hair and wears very form-fitting corsets, and it's still it's very, I would say, very substantial, formal, old-fashioned looking underwear, but it's a very different from her previous look. And there's been a response of many different flavors to this. So I just want to give people some background. Tell me sort of your thoughts coming into this.
Sure. Well, you asked something that I was not sure about, conflicted about, something and I mean, you said culture, and I guess I just sort of, it was something in pop culture that I wanted to think more about. And you are giving me a platform to do that. I am a fan. I'm a casual fan of Billie Eilish. I'm not someone who necessarily seeks her out all the time, and she is, she's a much younger generation. She's much cooler than most of the people I listen to, and so, but I love what you said about her. I love that she writes her own music. She writes her music with her brother. She sort of created this art in a vacuum kind of thing, which I think is really cool. Lorde did a similar thing a couple of years ago, and I admire these artists who sort of come out of their bedrooms in a way, but you can tell that they're dedicated and committed to what they're creating. And I love that about her. I have also always loved about her that she rejects the sexualization of being a teen pop icon. So I think that is when we had artists like Britney in the 90s, when Madonna was really young, we've always seen this. So as soon as you come out as this teen pop star, you are sexualized, or you are flaunting your sexuality, or whether you own it or whether someone else puts it on you. There is this idea that in order to sell records, you have to sell sex. And I think that is something that Billie Eilish has avoided. Yes, she was 17 when her first album came out. But I mean, Britney was really young when her first album came out as well, and I don't think she used her sexuality to sell albums, and Billie Eilish hasn't done that. And I mean, my response has been awesome. I love it. Her voice is amazing. She's really cool. She dresses in baggy clothes. She's got funky hair and really cool nails. I think, and and she's obviously gorgeous and not using it to sell records. So I was loving that vibe. And then, and I had friends who would watch the Grammys and comment on the Grammys, just like, wow, like, look at all these other women who are obviously, you know, I mean, we can't avoid the fact that we live in a patriarchal society. So here are all these women who are sort of dressed to pander to the patriarchy. And then here's Billie Eilish, who is not, and she's doing her own thing. And I'm sure that it's so much more complicated than that. But I mean, I guess that's sort of a message that she's sending out to her fans is, I'm going to dress this way. Then this Vogue cover came out. And so my first instinct was crap. Like, she is now conforming to this idea that pop stars need to look sexy and they need to sell sex. And it's clearly not that simple. She says in the article that she hid her body because she felt insecure about her body. And I mean, that is also another problem. Like, that has to do with body positivity, and that's a huge issue as well. And the media obviously makes women feel that they need to look a certain way. And then she came out with this, wearing this very, like you said, old-fashioned lingerie, lots of corsets, very structured, very pin-up style lingerie, which I so this is where my brain isn't. I don't think I need to feel one way or the other about this, and I have complicated feelings about this. She's blonde all of a sudden. So it's sort of like she's living up to this sort of Marilyn Monroe, Scarlett Johansson ideal. She looks a lot like Scarlett Johansson. So this sort of, she's turning into this, she's now this blonde bombshell. And which is sort of, I mean, the ultimate female American look. Pam Anderson, Marilyn Monroe. And that I can see how in one way she was very much saying, like, she felt great about her body, she felt like she was able to show it off, and she was very happy about that. And at the same time, she is still 19 years old, and she is still now showing images of her body in a way that is, sexualizing her, because she is wearing undergarments. And so that's where I'm just, yeah.
So, I guess two qualifications to just for the background is that one is that she made a point, and they talk in the article extensively, that she's saying this is her idea, that she wanted to do this. This is sort of a look she had played with in private and was excited to do this as a thing. The other thing, it's just my small qualification, that I still find it very funny, because the the one element of her look is it has not changed at all is the performatively dead eyes.
Dead eyes, dead eyes.
She's this classic 50s, bombshell, bottle blonde cover model with just absolute fuck you eyes.
Yeah.
It is, it's a striking look. Then there was this article in the New York Times uh, on May 4th. This is Ruth Laferla, and it ends. So Laferla quotes this tweet from a fan asking, why this change? So this is Laferla at the end of this article. That question was bound to arise. In an earlier phase of her career, Ms. Eilish could claim the distinction of being a one-off. Stylish, she insisted, had no place in her life. I could easily just be like, you're going to pick my clothes. So she's quoting Eilish from an earlier essay or article in which she says, I could let other people do all these different things and choose all these different elements of my career, but I'm not that kind of person and I'm not that kind of artist. And this is back to Laferla. Yet for Vogue, she placed her trust and vaunted image entirely in a team, one that, as it happens, was led by Dena Giannini, the magazine's style director, with input from top-rung designers including Alessandro Michele of Gucci. Her transformation would seem to suggest that Ms. Eilish is content these days to abandon her formerly maverick stance in favor of a fetish tinctured bombshell look that seemed hackneyed when Madonna was a girl. If her reinvention poses a risk, it is that of becoming just another cliche. For a variety of reasons, I'm much more interested in your thought on all of this. I will say that was the one piece to which I had an immediate and fairly one-dimensional response, which was, what a shitty, why shit on a 19-year-old's clothing? Like, Jesus Christ, let her wear what she wants to wear. Like why do you need to write an article, telling her that she's boring because of, she's just fucking stop. Don't, it just felt like bullying.
No, I agree. I mean, so when Billie sort of leaked her transformation on Instagram, I guess she basically broke Instagram. She was the first person to get 1 billion likes or something within 30 seconds. I mean, it's something outrageous. I totally agree with what you're saying. This article felt, I mean, I don't feel like she addressed anything, and she didn't. It was very dismissive. And
it's of her. I mean, it's like it points the finger at Eilish.
Yeah.
If you want to take Vogue to task, maybe that's an article to write. But
yes,
this 19-year-old kid. I mean, again, I can't. It's part of dad brain. But I can't help thinking of her as Jesus. She's like a very talented, very special little girl. Just stop fucking get her alone.
Yeah, no, I agree.
What felt easy to me initially was to say, well, her music is one thing, photo shoots, you do all that other stuff, whatever, I don't really care. And then something Joanna told me made me realize that there's an element I'm missing. And I realize I'm late to this game because you and my wife are both on Instagram. And I obviously know of it and know about it, but I had not realized until very recently that there was such a thing as an influencer qua influencer. That I understood that there were famous people, artists or various kinds of celebrities who also were on Instagram or various other platforms kind of selling stuff, selling a look, selling an image, and then sponsors would get involved in order to move their products. I had not realized that there were people who just did the sponsorship influencer part with no other career. They're not also musicians, they're not also actors or even models. Their job is selling a look and a lifestyle, and then they get sponsorship within that. But by virtue of the existence of influencers, there is such a thing, and this is where my mind broke, there is such a thing as an aspiring influencer. Right? Because you have struggling artists, so presumably you have struggling would-be influencers trying to influence. And that's when I started to think, well, I know that all of this is very stupid and boring to me, but just 20 years ago, you could make a very serious argument about why comic books were not art, or like
Yes.
TV was not art, even though by the time The Sopranos were coming, that was it. But I think like I don't want this to be art, but part of me feels like maybe this is the emergence of an art form, like a lifestyle as art form. Again, like performance art is, people, and certainly like there's autobiographical art, there's confessional art. Is this the I want us to separate the art from the artist, but it may be that it's not quite fair for me to dismiss dismiss it as a thing. uh, I don't know. What is that? What do you make of it? You are also though. I think you are both more newfangled and more old fashioned than I am in certain respects. So you can touch on.
Wait, I want to know how I'm more old-fashioned. I mean, I'm older, but
Oh no, I mean, I think that you are. I think it may be that you are as old-fashioned as I am when it comes to craft or tradition in some ways, but you are more. You are a more confident person. So yeah, so should need we worry about influencing as art, or will we just hopefully die before that
was
moment?
there ever a worry that it was going to be an art? So I've always thought that it was very commercially driven, but you're saying, I guess, because it's on Instagram, which is in some, I mean, I think I've never thought of influencing as an art form, but now you're making me think of it as an art form.
Well, TV was just a vehicle for selling commercials, right? I mean,
Yeah,
TV
true.
is just like an entertaining interlude between commercials, and that's
Right.
part of why it sucked so much, but it developed. That's
Wow.
that's what I'm wondering,
I totally see what you're saying. Um, and now you've upset me.
I was hoping you could reassure me.
Oh, I can't. You're probably right. What's the art form? Creating a brand? A brand like,
Yeah, I mean, I guess brand.
ooh,
Yeah,
I'm interested. I'm interested.
and like one could imagine a okay, so like like imagine like the HBO of influencers, where you have a larger studio effectively says like, all right, you're not going to have sponsorship, you're not going to like sell objects in your output, you're just going to have your vision for your brand, for your lifestyle, for however you feel, and you're just going to make that, and then that we will house that within our larger subscription service, so that it'll be like the purer, more artistic part, versus like network influencers, where it's every 30 seconds it's like, you can also buy this new phone, that's kind of what I imagine. you
Because the biggest influencers that I've come across were sort of travel lifestyle people who traveled and would take these phenomenal photos of just a moment on their holiday or on their vacation. And I think that's the first time I ever came across sort of this idea of that someone was an influencer their occupation. I was reading an article in American Airlines magazine because I was on a plane as usual, and there was a photo that everyone was just like, and then that photo happened. And of course, I had never seen this photo, but it was some photo that went viral on Instagram, and it was a pool in this little hotel, and the hotel then ended up getting more business than they've ever had probably in the total of time that they've existed. And it was just because of this one photo, and I sort of thought that's a really cool photo. And I guess I sort of thought of that person as being a photographer, right? So they're an influencer. They get free hotel stays everywhere they go. They get free restaurants, blah, blah, blah. Um, they must get paid by likes and whatever else.
like photography is a necessary but not sufficient part of it, right? Because if it were just a beautiful picture of a pool but there were no location attached to it, or if it were not, if it didn't have to do with an ongoing aesthetic or vision or lifestyle, or I keep thinking to me it's all shtick, but like if there's the idea is like somebody lives this way, or like I want to live that way, or I want to have
Yes.
a vacation in the key of X,
Yes.
that's part of it. And presumably then your personal conduct and your self-image and your presentation and like your interactions with people out in the world, that all becomes part of it too.
There's a Black Mirror episode about this. Have you watched Black Mirror?
I have. What's the Black Mirror episode?
So the one with Ron Howard's daughter, where she is,
Oh, the 5 stars. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, all the likes, all the likes, all the likes. So if you remember, the girl that she's supposed to be in the wedding, her hot friend
Yeah,
is this influencer person, like,
right.
and basically saying like, oh, it shows up well if I invite you, the sort of less cool friend, to be a part of my wedding. It gives me a better image and blah blah blah. And that whole idea, her fiance is clearly not into her and possibly homosexual, and this whole idea that it's all superficial. It's taken it to the extreme where your what you are on screen then actually dictates what you do in life, because you are selling this lifestyle, you are selling your brand, your own personal brand. But I guess the extreme of it there was that it was, I mean, everything you did got likes or dislikes, and you couldn't turn it off.
Yeah, I'm increasingly convinced that that's going to be a thing with different varieties of. I mean, I think as with like movies are definitely art, but they're definitely big schlocky dumb movies that exist only to like sell action figures. Like that's and then there's Tarkovsky, Marina Abramovic is a performance artist who's like her life is inextricable from her work in a slightly different way, that her body had to be part of it, and then people can recreate it, but it's the same the same the same inescapable quality that her life has when she's physically in an installation that she has to remain in. That would just be all the time.
Ish. I mean, the difference there is that when she's performing with someone, she is giving a performance, and she is giving them really a part of her. Like, I feel like she is so engaged in her performance that there is some sort of artistic currency sort of being exchanged there between the artist and the viewer.
I totally agree, but I would just say that that's because she's a good performance artist, or
Okay.
like there are shitty performance artists for whom that's not true, but they are also like naked and sitting on a block of ice or whatever. I think like
Right.
the degree to which there's that genuine engagement, that genuine, there is something, I think art is both extremely selfish and extremely selfless when it is at its best. And there, I think that engagement and that gift is really there, but it's there in the good work, and there probably will be critically acclaimed influencing work at some point, and that makes my stomach turn a little bit. But so to pivot to a at least a slightly more heartwarming example of lifestyle as something like art. You also brought up this Ali Eli piece. Do you know how to say their name?
No.
Yeah. Well, so it's Olleley. And this is the first non-binary cover model for L. And then this is a so this is an article that's as told to Lotta Jeffs, which I read based on the the texture of the prose as being like capably massaged by a professional writer, but it's sort of spoken in the voice of Ali, who is I forget, I mean, I think quite young, in the neighborhood of like Billie Eilish's age.
Yep.
So tell me why you pulled this article.
Just the idea of this sort of ultra feminine stereotype cover of Billie Eilish, Blonde Bombshell, versus Ellie's cover, which was sort of the opposite of that. So the idea of holding up these like I said earlier, over sexualized blonde teen pop star image, and then compared to a non-binary cover girl. It was just sort of interesting to me, again, to like go into this space where nothing in my mind is clear. It's just sort of this messy place where things are changing, and the way that we think about things are changing. And I thought that this cover was a really cool contrast to the Billy. I mean, obviously they're two completely different people and blah blah blah. But for the sake of the imagery,
Yeah.
I thought it was a very strong contrast between the two covers.
Do you respond to it at all? I mean, also part of my response, just thinking about raising two little girls, is maybe we hope that whatever, however my daughters grow up, that the burden doesn't feel exactly like that in that way for them.
Right. But I mean, they will obviously always have this pressure to look a certain way. I mean, I don't know, it's going away, or is it? I don't know. Is it getting worse? Sometimes I feel like because of our influencer friends, a lot of it
Yeah.
is getting worse. I mean, there are filters where everyone looks a certain way, and it's sort of like everything is coming to a head at once. So you have these lots of plastic surgery and everyone trying to look alike in this sort of feminine ideal. Kim Kardashian on the one end, Scarlett Johansson on the other end, I guess, sort of women. And then you have the emergence of non-binary individuals who are expressing themselves by saying, you know what, I'm not playing this game. Like I don't fit into these boxes that you're trying to put me into, and instead I'm just going to be me, the purest expression of myself in whatever form that may take. And I think all of this coming out at once, I mean, I know it's not new, it's nothing new, but there's such a spotlight on all of it that it's going to either, I think in some ways it's going to be amazing for kids who are going to finally feel like there are supportive places for them to go, and there are other people who they can see reflected back as themselves. But I also think, on the other hand, we're still getting this crazy need for women to look a certain way. And I mean, Instagram is there to sell products, and what is it selling more than anything? Beauty products, weight loss products, and fashion. I mean, those are the three big things that it's selling.
I think insofar as like peers have always been an intense influence, there's a whole new set of tools that now exist. Part of that is I think they'll be able to, as you said, like you can find people who are like you in a way that we couldn't. Um,
Yeah.
we had to go to college or what, so we're, or like weird places downtown before we could meet those people. Um, uh, they can find them right away, right? I mean, like I like did plays with like grown-ups when I was a kid, and I was like, that was how I saw my first like naked lady. It was also like how I heard a lot of words for the first time. It was like there's plenty of things that, like, yeah, they will be able to find stuff online for good and ill. But I think that the to the extent to which like mean girls create peer pressure, like they have a fucking megaphone like they never had before.
Yes.
I'll say that to in full disclosure, the other like slight reflexive response I had as a dad is like, oh, so many tattoos so young. Like, do what you like with your body. But like, part of me is like, what about, why don't you color your hair? Like, like what? I thought it was always like, dude, let's give you a mohawk. Let's just hold off mustaches a little, just a, But yeah, I can't.
You are such a dad.
I am like, the things that in these various articles that we missed, or that we or that I should say that I missed that you didn't, or I'm sure we're missing plenty, but
Oh yeah, I'm sure we're missing. I mean, yes. I mean, this is our very limited view on this, and we're not Billie Eilish aficionados. What I do want to say is, when you were talking about influencers earlier,
yes.
and I mentioned the fact that, Billie Eilish basically broke Instagram with all of her likes, we can't actually forget the fact that that is part of her career. So she is an artist 100%, and I know we've touched on it, but she is also an influencer. She has created this image on social media, and maybe that's where we'll see this. I mean, I know you're talking about influencer as an artist, as its own art form, but I do think that is the place where we see it. So she has definitely mastered this art form, on top of the fact that she is a super gifted musician. But there's nothing to say that she can't be both things. And if it is an art form, and if it is emerging as an art form, then, I mean, who better to sort of lead the way as this she can be Renaissance in the sense of a Renaissance man, in that she is multi-talented and over several different platforms or genres. So perhaps she's going to be maybe she legitimizes influencing in some way to make it palatable for us as an art form.
I'm really glad that I got to get you to come talk a little bit, and I'm also excited because, as you said, your other poems, which you were talking about sending around when you first came into contact with Scotland Street Press. This collection at some point will see the light of day, and we can.
Yes, so they were pretty much going to be released around the same exact time.
Okay.
Then Scotland Street Press wanted to put Restricted Movement forward for the Forward Prize, and there's a first collection, like a debut collection prize. It's one of the UK poetry prizes. So I had to make sure that this collection was first. So I sort of had to tell the other collection, which is coming out in the States, to hold off on publication until we knew for sure when this was being published. So now this is officially being published June 12th.
Okay.
And then I think Waving, which is the title of sort of my anthology of stuff that I've been publishing for the past 17 years, that is coming out in July.
All right. Okay. So there will be time by then for us to discuss Billie Eilish's third look. Well, that was our show. You can find more about Traci at traciode.com, all one word, TRACIODEA.com. You can also follow her at Traci O'Day on Twitter and Instagram. Restricted Movement is available now for purchase from Scotland Street Press. Waving will be coming soon. There will be a link to Restricted Movement right when this show drops. If you liked what you heard, please do take a moment to subscribe to SLEERICKETS, rate the show, review the show, or just recommend it to somebody you think might like it too. If you have questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, things you'd like to hear the show cover, or people you'd like to hear interviewed. Or actually, I've gotten a number of these now, and I'd love to get some more. If there's a poem, especially sort of an underappreciated poem that you want to share, please send any and all of this to SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. That's SLEERICKETS @gmail.com. Quick note, I meant to mention this last week, but I found out recently that for a while the website contact form was not actually linked to any email account, and so all of the messages were just getting dumped into the void. I know there were some that I missed. If you wrote me through the email contact form on the website, if you wrote me and I did not write you back, that is because I did not get your message. So please, send another one, and I will respond. Sorry about that. And thank you for listening. With any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.